Okay, let's unpack this. We've got two figures who, well, they pretty much live in the headlines, constantly stirring up intense feelings across America. Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
Right, you really can't escape them. And that the central question our sources get into here is absolutely fascinating. Do the American people love Musk or Trump more?
Now, that query, it might sound simple on the surface, maybe just, a popularity contest.
Yeah, like who gets more retweets or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as the source material makes really clear, it's much, much deeper than who gets more likes or better poll numbers.
Exactly. This deep dive isn't about simple metrics at all. The sources frame this question as a lens, almost like a way to peer into contemporary American values, explore different ideas of identity and leadership,
Hmm.
and even understand how trust and loyalty function in our, increasingly digital age. One source calls it a popularity paradox.
A popularity paradox. I like that.
Yeah, that really invites a profound exploration, as they put it.
A paradox. Yeah, I love that framing. And the sources we're diving into really lean into this, analyzing the debate from different angles, almost like setting up a formal debate framework.
Right, like an affirmative stance arguing for Musk.
And a negative stance arguing for Trump. Yeah.
It's actually a pretty smart way to structure the material, I think. It forces us to consider the strongest case for each side based on, well, public sentiment.
So our mission here, based on these sources, is to really unpack the core tensions and the different ways of thinking about what love and loyalty even mean in this specific context.
Uh-huh.
It's all about helping you understand why these two, very different figures evoke such powerful and often totally opposing responses from different parts of the American public.
And it's really crucial to understand up front how the sources define love here. They make it broad. It's not just romantic affection,
All right.
obviously.
Of course not.
But it encompasses admiration, loyalty, emotional attachment, and even ideological support. It's presented as a complex, multifaceted idea when we're talking about public figures and the sentiment they inspire.
Right. So the core question the sources pose is pretty stark. Do the American people love Musk or Trump more?
Yeah.
And they structure the analysis by asking us to consider that affirmative stance, the arguments for why Americans show greater affection for Musk versus the negative stance, the arguments for why they might have stronger love for Trump.
It's really about comparing public sentiment, isn't it? Trying to understand the nature of the emotional or ideological value placed on these two figures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the sources emphasize this isn't primarily about objective facts or policy debates.
No, not really.
It's evaluative. It focuses on the depth of that emotional attachment or love, as they've defined it, which, that immediately brings us to the heart of the complexity, right?
Absolutely. And how the sources break down the core concepts is actually really helpful for navigating this. For love, like we said, it's complex.
Admiration, loyalty.
Emotional attachment, ideological support. The sources note it can be, a literal emotional feeling or a more symbolic loyalty tied to identity.
Yeah.
And in the American context, they say it's intertwined with ideas of patriotism, personal identity, and belonging.
Okay. Then you have Musk, literally the entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
Tesla, SpaceX, all that.
The guy himself, yeah.
Yeah.
But the sources highlight that his extended identity, what he represents, associates him with innovation, futurism, disruption.
Technological optimism.
Right. Contextually, he embodies progress and, challenging the status quo.
And then Trump, literally the businessman and former president.
Yeah.
His extended identity involves things like nationalism, populism, challenging establishment norms.
The sources kind of frame him as symbolizing traditional American values, sovereignty, and that direct, often controversial approach.
Definitely controversial.
And finally, the American people, which broadly means the citizens whose opinions are being looked at.
Right.
The sources note this covers their collective identity, but also important subgroups within that. Contextually, they are the audience both shaped by and shaping the influence of these figures.
So based on those definitions, the sources argue this isn't just a typical debate. It leans heavily towards a value-based and psychological perception debate.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, it means we're evaluating perceptions of loyalty, admiration, and emotional connection, not just comparing resume points or policy positions.
Ah, okay. It's about what these figures represent to people on a deeper level.
Exactly. Which leads directly to the core points of controversy. The sources identify the sort of central tensions that make this such a complex question.
Okay, like what?
The first one is, what is love in this context and how does it actually manifest? Is it primarily that deep emotional attachment, or is it loyalty tied more to shared ideology and beliefs?
Yeah, that's a huge distinction, right? Do some people feel maybe a visceral emotional connection to Trump's persona and rhetoric, while others feel a different kind of connection, maybe more of an intellectual admiration for Musk's ambitious vision and his achievements? The sources suggest these are maybe different kinds of affection.
That makes sense. Then there's the fundamental clash between progress and innovation versus tradition and national identity.
Right. Musk, in the source's framing, represents future-oriented technology, pushing boundaries.
And Trump is often seen as symbolizing, well, nostalgia, tradition, and defending national sovereignty.
So is the loyalty shown rooted more in seeking a radically different future or maybe longing for a familiar past? That's a core tension.
And the sources also pose the question of whether love for a public figure is tied more to personal charisma and persona or to policy and results.
Yeah. Which of this carries more weight in how Americans perceive and connect with these figures? Good question.
Finally, there's the role of public ideology and broader societal values. Different groups within America prefer one figure over the other, largely based on their cultural, political, and socioeconomic perspectives.
So, is the love genuine and deep-seated, or is it maybe more superficial, or perhaps limited to specific echo chambers?
These tensions, highlighted by the sources, really underscore why this isn't just about who's slightly more popular day to day, but what fundamental values resonate most powerfully.
Okay, so with those tensions in mind, let's look at how the sources frame the arguments for each side in this debate, so to speak.
Right. The affirmative view, arguing that Americans love Musk more, seems to center on the idea that he embodies forward-looking aspirations and technological optimism.
Right. This side suggests his innovation, his work on environmental progress maybe, and his pursuit of scientific discovery resonate deeply with a core American ethos of progress and modernity.
Yeah, the next big thing idea.
Exactly. They argue this evokes a genuine admiration and, yes, love, because he represents pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And they say his global influence, positioning America as a tech leader, is seen by many as a form of patriotic loyalty. Supporting him is supporting American ingenuity on the world stage.
That's an interesting angle.
Plus, his perceived authenticity, his openness about his goals, his direct, sometimes unfiltered communication is argued to foster a deep emotional connection for those who see him as a figure of aspiration, someone breaking the mold.
Okay. Now, the negative side counters this. They argue that Trump holds a more profound place in many American hearts because his support is rooted in cultural, traditional, and populist values that run incredibly deep.
Right, tapping into something different.
They argue his appeal taps into enduring American ideals like nationalism and sovereignty, creating a level of emotional loyalty that, they say, goes far deeper than maybe superficial admiration for technical achievement.
This side emphasizes a powerful sense of personal connection, identity affirmation, and cultural affinity with Trump.
Yeah, his rhetoric often evokes a strong sense of nostalgia, resonating powerfully with those who feel perhaps left behind or alienated by rapid societal changes.
He's seen not just as a leader, but as a kind of protector of American sovereignty and traditional ways of life for those supporters.
And crucially, the negative side argues Trump's relationship with his supporters is more visceral, built on perceived authenticity in his defiance of political correctness and established elites.
His style.
His candid style is seen as honest even when it's controversial, forging emotional bonds that, they argue, resemble genuine love. This is often reinforced by a sense of shared grievances and hopes against what they see as the establishment. This love is described by the sources as really deep-seated, rooted in shared narratives of patriotism and resilience.
It's pretty clear how the sources see a fundamental clash emerging here. The affirmative argument links love to valuing innovation, progress, a future vision, seeing Musk as the embodiment of these.
It's presented more as an intellectual admiration, maybe, for impact and genius.
While the negative argument sees love as a deeper emotional and ideological connection, rooted in shared values, cultural belonging, and national pride.
For this side, it's more about identity affirmation and emotional resonance than necessarily about technical competence or futuristic vision, maybe.
This really brings us back to that philosophical question the sources raise. Is the love shown for a public figure primarily a cognitive response to their achievements and vision?
The intellectual side.
Or is it a more fundamental, effective bond based on shared values, identity, and emotional resonance.
The gut feeling side. And there's also the clash between breadth of popularity and depth of influence, right?
Explain that.
Well, the affirmative might argue Musk's global presence and broad recognition represent a wider form of admiration and influence, suggesting maybe a broader love.
Okay, reaching more people, even if less intensely for some.
But the negative counters that Trump support, while perhaps less universally spread, is intensely loyal and deeply emotionally engaged.
Right.
In this view, true love prioritizes that passionate devotion among a significant group, emphasizing intensity over sheer breadth of appeal.
That makes sense. The sources also anticipate how these arguments might directly clash, like in a real debate.
Oh yeah, how so?
Well, an affirmative rebuttal might argue that Trump's attachment, while intense, is more akin to a cultish following, perhaps based on fear, grievance, or polarization, rather than a foundation of authentic, positive bonding. That's one potential argument.
And the sources suggest a negative countermeasure to that would be to define love broadly enough to include intense loyalty and identity-based support,
Oh, okay.
while perhaps arguing that Musk's admirers are more detached or maybe even transactional in their support.
Conversely, a negative rebuttal could be that Musk is widely respected but not truly loved.
Right. Admired for his brilliance and achievements, but perhaps lacking that deep personal connection, vulnerability, or relatability that fosters genuine love for a public figure.
Especially given his immense wealth and sometimes perceived, aloofness.
And the sources suggest an affirmative countermeasure there is to show that love manifests differently in the modern era. Maybe Musk's public struggles, moments of transparency, his commitment to these huge goals beyond simple profit.
Could be seen as signs of emotional depth that resonate.
And even things like intense digital engagement or brand loyalty to his companies are presented as indicators of a modern kind of emotional attachment.
Interesting. There's also a potential cross-cutting rebuttal, the sources mention, shifting the definition of love entirely,
How so?
to be measured by objective impact and progress rather than subjective emotion. In this view, Musk's concrete achievements, space, EVs, etc., give him a clear win in terms of long-term societal impact.
Which could be reframed as a form of loving the future he's helping create. Kind of abstract, but I see the argument.
But, as you might expect, the sources anticipate the opposition would strongly reject this.
Oh, I bet. Arguing that love, by its very nature, is inherently subjective and emotional and cannot be reduced to measurable, quantifiable impact.
Exactly. So looking at the summary provided by the sources, the affirmative argument for Musk really leans into innovation, progress, and presenting his openness as a form of modern authenticity.
It appeals to aspiration and a forward-looking vision for America. Its core strength, according to the sources, is connecting with those who prioritize technological advancement and future possibilities.
And the negative argument for Trump strongly emphasizes traditional values, cultural identity, and intense loyalty.
It taps into deep emotional and historical ties, finding its strength among those who see him as a powerful defender of national sovereignty and cultural roots. Its core strength is that sheer emotional intensity and identity-based resonance.
Both sides, of course, have potential critiques, as the sources point out.
Naturally.
The argument for Musk might be seen as valuing innovation perhaps over stability or tradition.
And might miss the kind of deep emotional attachment many reserve for figures tied to identity and history. Yeah.
And the argument for Trump might be seen as relying heavily on nostalgia and identity politics that perhaps don't align with changing societal values.
And whose intensity could be viewed negatively by those outside the core group.
Right. Ultimately, the sources conclude that the strength of each argument for any given American depends heavily on whether they personally value progress and innovation more or tradition and national identity more.
And similarly, whether they prioritize deep emotional attachment or more rational admiration. Love here is presented as subjective, multidimensional.
And varying widely based on these underlying values and perspectives. It's not a simple calculation.
Not at all. And the real-world significance of this debate, according to the sources, is that it really mirrors larger ongoing tensions within America.
Between embracing innovation, globalization, and change on one hand,
And preserving tradition, national sovereignty, and cultural roots on the other. It really shows how powerful public figures become potent symbols of these competing visions for the nation's future.
it forces you, the listener, to think think critically about what love and loyalty truly mean in the context of public life and political figures.
Yeah, is it about admiration for achievement and contribution, or is it about shared cultural and emotional bonds, that sense of belonging? What do Americans truly prioritize and connect with on the deepest level?
Analyzing these figures through the framework the sources provide isn't just about who's more popular day to day. It's presented as a valuable tool for understanding the intersection of psychology, values, and communication in our current landscape.
It helps us interpret why certain figures resonate so powerfully with specific groups and how they come to symbolize these larger cultural narratives.
So when we analyze these figures and the sentiment they evoke, using the lens provided by the sources, it offers valuable insights into the diverse values and identities within America today.
It helps us understand not just who people support, but crucially, why they support them.
And what that reveals about fundamentally different visions for the country's future.
It really underscores that love for public figures, unlike, personal relationships, isn't one size fits all.
Right. For some, as the sources suggest, it's that intellectual admiration for groundbreaking achievement and a vision of progress.
For others, it's that deeper emotional and cultural loyalty tied to a sense of identity and belonging. Two very different things, potentially.
And drawing on the sources' discussion of this debate, revealing something significant about the soul of the nation, or highlighting competing visions for America's future.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for you to consider.
What does this whole debate about who Americans love more? The tech visionary pushing frontiers or the populist champion of tradition truly reveal about what matters most to the American people right now.
And maybe where they collectively see the nation heading.
This clash of sentiment rooted in these two incredibly powerful figures ultimately asks us all, really, what kind of country does America want to be?